Help in Pharmaceuticals in association with Higher Secondary Principals Forum.
Good day, students. Today I am going to cover in the economics subject Unit 2 Demand Analysis, but the second part. In the syllabus you will notice it will be subtopics 10, 11, 12 and 13. Now the following are the subtopics: meaning and determinants of price elasticity of demand, the types of price elasticity of demand, the three aspects of the relationship between price elasticity of demand and total expenditure, and finally we are going to learn how to measure price elasticity of demand. First, let us look at the meaning. What exactly is price elasticity? I am sure you understand the meaning of the concept of elasticity. If you take a rubber band and you try to stretch it, there will be times when the rubber band really will stretch very wide, or it might stretch a little, right? So if it stretches a lot, it shows that the rubber band is very elastic. But if it stretches little, it shows it is less elastic or inelastic. So this concept of elasticity has been used to understand or to apply elasticity with respect to demand. Now, with respect, you have already covered the law of demand, movements, shifts, right? Now, under that, we know that movements and shifts only help us understand, or they show us the direction in which demand changes. So, if the price comes down, demand will go up, or if the price rises, demand falls. So, this inverse relationship shows the direction of demand. Now, if we want to know by how much is demand changing, so for example, let us suppose say price has increased, demand comes down. By how much has demand come down? That is not being explained by movements and shifts. So, to understand by how much, we apply the concept of elasticity with respect to demand, and therefore we get price elasticity of demand. So, now remember, price elasticity of demand helps us to understand the degree of change, and this change is being measured with the help of percentage. Now, the concept of elasticity is very broad. Whichever factor influences or changes demand will have a relationship or will show the elasticity. So, now since we are talking about demand changing due to price, so we are talking about price elasticity of demand. Now, besides price, we also have other determinants of demand, which include income, then price of related goods, okay. But here in this subtopic, we are specifically talking of only price elasticity. So, what is the use of price elasticity? Price elasticity is helping an economist to find out how sensitive is a commodity to a price change. So, there will be some commodities, the moment the price changes, demand changes by a large amount. While there will be some commodities, even though price has changed by a large amount, demand does not react to the price change. So, they are less price sensitive. So, in brief, we can say that now price elasticity of demand is the measurement of a percentage change in quantity demanded in relation to a percentage change in price. And we use this percentage so that we can compare between different commodities which may be expressed in different units. Now, price elasticity is represented by the symbol ED. It is a capital E and a small d. Now, let us go to the next type, the next section, and that is the types of elasticity of demand. Now, in all we have 5 types of elasticities. Which are those? First, perfectly elastic demand. Number 2, perfectly inelastic demand. Number 3, unitary elastic demand. Number 4, relatively elastic demand. And the fifth one is relatively inelastic demand. Let's look at each of these 5 types in detail. So, the first is perfectly elastic demand. The word itself tells you perfectly elastic, any amount. So, in this case, we notice that it is a situation where the demand is infinite, that means any amount of the quantity can be demanded at a prevailing price, at a specific price. Now, if that price has to change, the demand falls to 0. Therefore, since here we are talking about an infinite quantity that is being demanded, therefore, value of ED will always be infinity as represented by this symbol infinity, right. Now, how will the demand curve be in this case? In this case, the demand curve will be such that, remember, quantity demanded has to be infinite. So, therefore, any amount of the quantity can be demanded. So, what should be the shape of the demand curve? It is surely a straight line parallel to the x-axis. Now, from the demand curve that we have drawn, we know that quantity demanded is measured on the x-axis, while price is measured on the y-axis. So, in this case, the demand curve is a straight line. In this case, it is PD, which is parallel to the x-axis. Now, what does this parallel line tell us? That price is the same at OP. Any amount of the quantity can be demanded, OQ2, OQ, OQ1, and so on. Okay. So, this talks about, or this says that ED value will always be infinite. So, let us go to the next one, and that is perfectly inelastic demand. Now, what is perfectly inelastic demand? Again, the other extreme. Now, in this case, it is inelastic. That means perfectly inelastic, no change at all. So, here we can conclude that quantity demanded does not respond to a change in price. So, the quantity demanded is remaining fixed at a particular point. What about the price? Price may change by any amount. Does the demand change? No, the demand will remain fixed at a particular point. So, therefore, in this case, what do you think is the value of elasticity? ED value. ED value is equal to 0 because the quantity demanded is not changing at all. Now, the closest example that I could give for perfectly inelastic demand would be a life-saving drug. Whatever may be the price of the drug, you are anyway going to buy it no matter what, isn't it? Because it is ultimately the question of saving a life. So, therefore, in case of perfectly inelastic demand, what is the shape of the demand curve? It will be a straight line as seen in this curve, D. A straight line parallel now to the y-axis, right. Now, this straight line tells you that the quantity demanded is fixed. OQ is the quantity demanded. At any price, price may be OP, price may be OP2, OP1, whatever may be the price, you are going to buy that, you are going to buy the good because it is a question of saving a life. Okay. So, this is the second type of price elasticity. Then let us move ahead. Okay. We now look at the third type of price elasticity, and that is unitary elastic demand. Now, what does unitary elastic demand tell you? Now, this is a situation wherein a change in price brings about the same change in demand. That means price changes by a certain X amount, demand will also change by X amount. So, therefore, we can say that if price has to decrease by 10%, quantity demanded will increase by 10%. So, both are changing in the same proportion. Clear? So, in this case, what do you think will be the value of elasticity? Remember, this in order to calculate elasticity, we divide percentage change in quantity demanded by percentage change in price, and if both the numerator and the denominator are the same, definitely they will cancel out and it will be equal to 1. Therefore, ED value is always 1 in case of unitary elastic demand. Now, what will be the shape of the curve in this case? Now, in this case, the curve is like a regular demand curve, okay, and when we go to plot the curve, when we draw the curve, okay, a downward sloping demand curve, and we mark the points OP, OP1, Q and Q1, you will notice that the distance between P and P1 and the distance between Q and Q1 will always be the same. That means this area here must be equal to this area here. Okay. So, now unitary elastic demand tells you what? So, price is changing in a certain amount, quantity demanded is also changing by the same amount. Therefore, ED value will be same. So, both variables are changing in the same proportion. So, when demand is sensitive, is equally sensitive to the change in price. Now, let us go ahead and go to the next type of elasticity, and that is relatively elastic demand. Now, this is the fourth type of elasticity. This is a more practical a type of elasticity which we can apply to our real lives. Okay. Now, in this case, the change in price is bringing about more than change in demand. That means your change in demand is larger while your change in price is small. Now, this tells you that the moment there is a small change in price, demand reacts to the price change. So, demand is very sensitive to a change in price. So, this type of elasticity is called as relatively elastic demand. So, if there is a 10% decrease in price, this 10% decrease in price causes a more than 10% increase in price. So, in this case a 20% increase in price. So, that means demand is reacting sharply to a change in price. So, what would be the value of ED in this case? It will always be greater than 1. The examples would under relatively elastic demand would be all goods which we consider as luxurious goods. So, for example, if I have to buy some designer clothes or to buy some clothing of some brands, I always buy when I notice that the price has come down, there is some offer of sale, some discounts are being offered, because otherwise it is difficult for me to afford the brand. But the moment the price changes a little, demand for that particular brand increases. So, also is the case of jewelry. The moment gold prices come down slightly, you have a rush for making jewelry, isn't it? Okay. So, this would be an example of relatively elastic demand. Now, what would be the shape of the demand curve? Now, in this case, it is a regular demand curve, a downward sloping demand curve. Now, the only difference is that this demand curve has a flat shape. So, if we had to draw a demand curve this way, okay, for relatively elastic demand, the curve tilts a little this side and it becomes flat. Now, what does this flat demand curve signify? This will tell me that if the change in price is so much, P to P1, 10% reduction in price, demand is changing by a larger amount, which is 20%. Do you see this length greater than this length? Yes. So, this can be shown, this larger area can be shown only when you draw a flat demand curve. Is that clear? So, in case of relatively elastic demand, your demand curve has a flat shape and the value of ED is greater than 1. Let us go on to the next, and that is relatively inelastic demand. Now, in case of relatively inelastic demand, what do we observe? In this case, what is happening? There is a change in price, but the change in price is bringing a very small percentage change in demand. That means demand is not reacting to a price change. Price is changing by a large amount, but what is happening to demand? Demand changes by a very small amount. Demand changes, of course, but by a small amount. Now, let us see what happens. So, in case there is a 10% decrease in price, price has decreased by 10%. What happens? Demand will increase, but by how much is demand increasing? By just 5%. So, that means demand has not reacted much to this change in price. So, now, in case of relatively inelastic demand, what will be the value of ED? ED value will always be less than 1. Now, what are some of the examples of commodities which exhibit or show a relatively inelastic demand? Will be all the necessities of life. So, for example, food grains, fruits, vegetables. What do we observe about the prices of these goods? Even if these prices of these goods increase, suppose prices of vegetables, fruits, especially now during monsoons, they rise a lot, right? Do we say that we will stop consuming? No. We will reduce maybe our consumption, but we are still going to consume, right? So, that price change does not influence me. Or let us suppose say tomorrow the price falls by a small amount. Is it that I am going to go and consume a lot of fruit and vegetable? No, there will be a certain amount which I am going to consume, isn't it? It is not that I am going to increase my consumption by a large amount. So, that explains the reason why demand changes by a small amount. See here. So, here the demand has increased, price has fallen down by 20%, but what do you observe about demand? Demand has increased by just 10%. So, therefore, in this case, although the price changes by a large amount, the consumer does not react much and therefore, he increases his demand, but by just 10% or less than 20%. So, therefore, we can say that relatively inelastic demand, the value of ED will always be less than 1. So, this was all about the 5 types of elasticities. Now, we will go on, we will proceed to the next part, and that was determinants of price elasticity of demand. Now, these are some of the determinants, they are almost 10 in number, 9 in number. So, we are going to look at each of these determinants in detail. The first one, nature of the commodity. Now, this particular determinant categorizes, or we have commodities being classified into 3 kinds: necessities, luxuries and comfort goods. Now, necessities, as I told you, electricity, water supply, food grains, fruits, vegetables. Now, these goods have a relatively inelastic demand. Why? Because I am not very sensitive to a price change, because whatever may be the price, I have to continue consuming the commodities. So, I am going to buy the commodities irrespective of the price change. So, inelastic demand. What about the second? Luxury. Luxury goods, be it wines, jewelry, expensive clothing, luxurious cars, even for example, even air conditioners, certain kinds of electronic equipment. So, now in this case what is happening? I am going to think about buying these goods only when I notice that there is a price change. So, for example, suppose you all want to buy your favorite car and then you realize that the price has gone up. What do? For some time you may say, okay, I will postpone, I won't buy it right now. Or let us suppose say we always sometimes wait for offers to come from car companies, and those are the times we go to pick up, go to buy the cars. Yes, so that means you are reacting to a price change, you are reacting to an offer price. So, that is why your demand increases. So, these goods have a relatively elastic demand. So, they are very sensitive to a price change. And finally, you have comfort goods like milk, fan, scooter. Okay, they are jointly demanded goods, like how we say complementary goods. These have they exhibit or they show a moderate amount of elasticity. Let us go ahead. The next determinant of elasticity is availability of substitute. Now, all goods which have close substitutes, okay, substitutes are available. Now, these goods have an elastic demand. Why? Because the consumer has an option of shifting to another good, isn't it? So, if price of one has increased, I have the choice of moving or changing to buying another good. So, therefore, we can say that there is a elastic demand, right. So, the consumer has a choice of choosing the substitute goods. What about goods without substitutes? Now, they have a inelastic demand. Why inelastic? Because whatever the price of the good, I have to buy it because I am consuming. The best example would be cigarettes and liquor. So, whoever is, remember these are addictive products, right. The moment you are consuming them, you get addicted to it. So, whatever may be the price tomorrow, you do not have a substitute for them. So, whatever may be the price tomorrow, you are not going to be bothered by the price change, you are going to consume the amount that you regularly consume. The next is diversity of uses. Now, this factor talks about commodities which can be put to variety. That means there will be some uses which can have multiple uses, or there will be some commodities which have limited use. Now, what is the case of commodities which have multiple uses? For example, electricity. Okay. Now, such commodities have an elastic demand. What happens? So, the moment you notice a price rise, you will try to limit your energy consumption at home. Suppose tomorrow your electricity bill has gone up. Your parents, I am sure they tell you, don't waste electricity, don't put off the lights, put off the fan, right? Don't keep any device running. Okay, so that means you are reacting to a price change and therefore you are limiting the use of that product. Or for example, I am sure you all face this with your internet data. Okay. So, now suppose if you have unlimited data, some mobile networks providers they offer unlimited data. So, you are very free about downloading, browsing and watching videos and video conferencing. Now, the moment you realize that the service provider has increased the price of data, what are you going to do? You will try to limit yourself. Maybe if you are watching 3 videos a day, you will say, okay, now I will just watch 1 video a day. Why? Because you will have to pay more, isn't it? Are you reacting to a price change? Yes. So, therefore, we can call it elastic demand. What about commodities which do not have multiple uses, limited use? For example, paper pulp is used only for printing paper, okay, for printing. What about coffee beans? Mostly used for producing coffee. Right. Now, in this case, the demand is inelastic. Why? Because I have to buy that commodity if I want to produce coffee, or if I want it. Newspaper printing agencies definitely need paper pulp, so they will buy it no matter what the price. Let us look at the 4th point, and that is postponement of use. Now, this point is about certain commodities whose consumption can be postponed, certain commodities whose consumption cannot be postponed. So, for example, if you are dealing with a commodity whose consumption can be postponed, for example, the textbook gives an example of residential homes. Suppose if you want to buy a home, you want to buy a new house, okay, you definitely look at interest rates because you borrow money, you do not have the money to buy the house, isn't it, with straight money. So, generally people borrow because it is a high priced. So, we borrow funds from the bank and then, so when you borrow funds, you look at the interest rate, remember, isn't it? So, now when it comes to interest rate, if the interest rate is high, what will you do? You will think twice and you will say, oh, maybe I do not need a house right now, I will postpone and I will wait maybe for the interest rates to come down a little and then I will make a decision on buying a house. Are you getting it? What are you doing? You are basically reacting to a price change which is that interest rate. So, in this case you say, okay, I will postpone. So, if a commodity whose consumption can be postponed, you will not buy it right away, you will wait for the price to change and then decide on buying the commodity. What about commodities whose consumption cannot be postponed? For example, medicines. I am used to consuming certain drugs as a part of my daily life, okay, whatever problems, health issues that I face. So, certain medicines I need on a daily basis. Now, am I going to look at, can I say that I am going to postpone the use of, I am going to postpone the consumption of my medicine? Definitely not, isn't it? So, therefore, in this case, what are you doing? Here now you are the demand is going to be inelastic, because whatever may be the price of the medicine, I am going to buy it. Is that clear? Okay. Let's go ahead. Let's look at the fifth factor, and that is the income level of the buyer. Now, all those individuals who have a high level of income, okay, now these individuals are said to have an inelastic demand. That means they have sufficient money, so they are really not bothered about a rise or a fall in price, because they have sufficient purchasing power with them. So, if income levels of the buyers are low, they are more sensitive to price change, and therefore, their demand is described to be elastic. Let us go to the sixth point, and that is habits of a consumer. Now, habits also determine the price elasticity. In what way? If a consumer is habituated to the good, it is already overlapping with one point which I discussed previously. For example, cigarettes and tobacco. If I am already habituated to a certain these kind of goods, what is happening? I am going to buy these irrespective of whether whatever may be the price. Why? Because I have a habit of smoking a cigarette every day. So, I have to smoke. I cannot give up my smoking, isn't it? So, therefore, I will buy the cigarette no matter what the price. So, that is the reason why you notice that there are times when such commodities, cigarettes, alcohol, tobacco, these are always highly taxed commodities. Why? Why do governments do that? Because they know that whatever may be the price, people who are habituated to those commodities will buy the commodities irrespective of what is the price. I am sure you have noticed it during the lockdown. Post the lockdown, when the lockdown just started to open and government revenue was drying up because they were not receiving, economic activity came to a standstill, right? So, government decided that they are going to start the sale of alcohol. And did you notice that there were a lot of queues across the country? This is the result, because people are habituated to it and government knows that people will buy it no matter what. Right. So, that therefore, government opened up liquor shops because it needed the revenue also. So, the taxes were increased and governments had revenue also coming in. Then we go to the seventh point, and that is proportion of income spent on a commodity. Now, sometimes we come across goods which are of a very small value, no? So, you will end up spending a very small amount of your income. For example, matchbox, newspaper, needle, thread, you hardly spend, no? You spend very small sum of money. So, in this case, it is, you can say the demand is inelastic for such commodities. It really does not matter for you tomorrow, even if the price of a matchbox increases from 5 rupees to 10 rupees, it really won't matter for you. But if you look at a commodity like a TV, if the price of TV is 50,000 and it becomes 1 lakh, definitely it matters, right? Because that is a big huge sum. But for commodities which are small priced, it really does not matter. So, commodities where you spend a small proportion of your income, they are inelastic demand, while those commodities where you spend a large proportion of your income, such commodities have an elastic demand. So, examples would be car, TVs, fridge, smartphones. Next we come to price level. This point almost overlaps with the price with the previous one. So, at higher level of price, demand is elastic because you have to spend a large amount of your income on that, isn't that commodity. So, you are sensitive to a price change. But if the price is at a lower level of price, it is inelastic. Even if the price increases by a certain amount, it really will not matter for you. And finally, we look at the time period. Now, 2 time period, short period, long run period. Short period demand is inelastic. That means in the short run, I am going to buy a commodity irrespective of the price because I have to consume it. I may be habituated, I am used to it, whatever might be the reason, I am going to buy it. In the long run, demand is elastic. Why? Because long run is a time period which is sufficient for people to change their habits. So, if you were used to a particular brand of tea or a coffee, okay, and now you realize that it is too expensive for you. It is only over a period of time that you can change your brand, isn't it? So, therefore, in the long run, the demand will be elastic. So, with this we come to the end of this subtopic. Now we are going to look at the relationship between price elasticity of demand and total expenditure. Now, this relationship between price elasticity and total expenditure has been put forth by Professor Alfred Marshall. Now, Professor Alfred Marshall says that you are able to find out if a commodity is elastic or inelastic depending on the change in total expenditure in relation to a price, in relation to the price of the commodity. Now, what does he mean by this? He explains elasticity in the context of 3 situations. First, a rise or a fall in own price of a commodity causes no change in the total expenditure. So, even if the price has increased or even if the price has decreased, the amount that you are spending on that commodity is constant. Is that clear? So, therefore, there is no change in total expenditure. Therefore, you can conclude that such commodities have or they possess unitary elastic demand, or ED is equal to 1. Now, the second situation is where if there is a fall in own price, okay, and your total expenditure rises, or if there is a rise in price and the total expenditure falls. Now, in this case, okay, the relationship between the variables price and total expenditure is like in opposite direction. Therefore, you can conclude that the elasticity will be greater than 1, or it is relatively elastic demand. And the third situation is where suppose price falls, your expenditure also falls, or if the price rises, expenditure also rises. So, in this case, we can conclude that the elasticity of demand is less than 1 or relatively inelastic demand. Okay. Let us understand these 3 situations in the form of a table. Now, let us understand the same relationship with this table. Now, look at this first column, it is price, right. So, we know that price is decreasing. Second column is quantity demanded, inverse relationship, therefore, quantity demanded is increasing. Now, this third column is showing the total outlay. Total outlay is the total expenditure. Now, I am getting this column when I multiply these two columns. So, now 10 into 1 10, 9 into 2 18, 8 into 3 24, 7 4s are 28, 6. So, in this way this is basically a product of first and second column, right. Now, if you notice in the first situation, okay, price, let us look at the first situation, price increases. So, for example, look at price 5 and look at price 6, okay. Price has increased from 5 to 6, because of which quantity demanded decreases from 6 to 5, right. How much was the expenditure when the price at rupees 5, expenditure was 30 rupees. Now, what happens when the price increases, expenditure still continues to remain 30. So, either although the price has increased this way, or if the price decreases, do you notice, do you observe that the expenditure is remaining constant? Yes, isn't it? So, therefore, this shows that the ED value is 1, which is unitary elastic demand. Is that clear? The second situation, price increases, okay. So, let us start from 7. Price becomes 7, 8, 9, 10. Therefore, quantity demanded comes down, right. Quantity demand is 1, 2, 3, 4. What do you observe about the total expenditure? Has the total expenditure falling? It was 28, then it is 24, 18, 10. So, although the price has increased, expenditure has come down. Or if price decreases, expenditure goes up, vice versa, same situation. So, therefore, ED is greater than 1, we can conclude that ED is greater than 1 and therefore, relatively elastic demand. And finally, we come down, look at the numbers below 5. When the price comes down, quantity demanded increases. What do you observe about the expenditure? Price comes down, price has decreased. Quantity demand expenditure has also come down, isn't it, from 28, 24, 18, 10, right? Or if price goes up, okay, demand comes, okay. What do you observe about demand? What do you observe about the expenditure? Is the expenditure also going up? Therefore, what can you conclude about elasticity? ED is less than 1 or relatively inelastic demand. So, this relationship was put forth by Professor Alfred Marshall. Now, let us go ahead. Now, we are going to learn how to measure price elasticity of demand, okay. And as you are already aware that we measure it in terms of percentage, right. So, basically we are going to learn how to calculate price elasticity of demand using percentage method, one, and the other is using the graphical method, which is the geometric method. So, we have two methods, percentage method where we are going to actually learn to calculate, while the second is geometric method, which is just a graphical method. Now, let us look at the first one, and that is the percentage method. This percentage method consists of 3 steps, trying to arrive at the price elasticity using 3 steps. What is the first step? First step, you need to find out the original demand, difference in demand. Remember, price is changing from X amount to Y amount. Quantity demanded is also changing from one amount to Y amount, isn't it? So, therefore, there will be an original demand and there will be a new demand, right? And then we need to find, so original demand and difference in demand. The new and the old demand is your, if you take the subtraction between the two, you will get the difference. So, if I am able to find the original demand and difference in demand, I have to use this formula. Percentage change in demand is equal to difference in demand divided by original demand multiplied by 100. I am going to discuss an example and you will understand it clearly. The second step, now this remember was with respect to, this whole step is with respect to one variable, which is demand. The second step is with respect to the second variable, and that is price. Original price, difference in price. So, I take this percentage change in price will be difference in price divided by original price multiplied by 100. When I get both the percentage change in price for both the variables, I am going to then replace it in my main formula, which is percentage change in quantity demanded by percentage change in price. Let us look at an example to simplify. Let us suppose say this is the problem that you have been given. Price at rupees 20, demand is 100 units. When price increases to rupees 30, demand falls down to or decreases to 50 units. So, what is your original demand? 100. What is the new demand? 50. Therefore, what is the difference in demand? 100 minus 50, which is 50. Clear? Can we replace it in the main formula? Yes, you already have what you needed. Percentage change in demand is difference in demand, which is 50. Original demand, which is 100, multiplied by 100. 100 and 100 will cancel out. Therefore, what remains is 50%. Clear? This is the first step. The second step again will be for price variable. This was all for demand. Now, for price variable, original price is 20. New price is 30. Therefore, difference in price will be the difference between the two, subtract, and therefore, what I get is 10. Now, apply this to the main formula, that is percentage change in price is equal to difference in price divided by original price into 100. So, difference in price I found out 20 minus 30 is 10, right. Now, what is the original price? 20 multiplied by 100. So, therefore, when I cancel it out 20 into 5, so 10 into 5 gives me 50%. Okay. Let us go ahead. Now, kindly note these students that in case you get, when you find a difference, if you get a negative sign, we have to ignore that negative sign. Okay, because when it comes to calculation of price elasticity of demand, we do not consider the negative sign. So now I already have the percentage change in demand and the percentage change in price. I now replace it in the main formula, and what remains, 50% divided by 50%, which cancel out, and what do I get is ED is equal to 1. And ED equals to 1 corresponds to which particular type of elasticity? Unitary elastic demand. So now if you learn each of these steps, okay, the 3 steps, you are easily able to solve any problems that you will get with respect to measurement of price elasticity of demand. Clear? Okay. So if you get the value of ED in any of these categories, then you will be able to tell me, you will have to write there what is the type of elasticity. For example, after calculating the numbers, you get value of ED as 0. You know, therefore you have to say therefore perfectly inelastic demand. If you get a number which is infinite, now in that case it will be perfectly elastic demand. If it's 1, unitary elastic demand. If it's less than 1, relatively inelastic demand. And if it's a number which is greater than 1, 2, 3, 4, any number, then it is relatively elastic demand. And finally we come to the next method, which is the geometrical method. As I mentioned to you, it's a graphical method of trying to measure elasticity. Now, this method measures elasticity at different points on a demand curve. So that's why we also call it as a point method of measuring elasticity. And remember, this method is used with respect to a linear demand curve or a straight line demand curve. Let's see what this method is all about. This is the way we would go ahead and draw a demand curve, right? Now in this case, remember, it's a curve which is joining, it's a line, straight line intersecting both x and the y axis. So Mn is a straight line linear demand curve, okay, and point P is the midpoint of this segment Mn. Now this midpoint divides the entire line of Mn into 2 parts or 2 segments, Pm, which is the upper segment, and Pn, which is the lower segment. Let us now try to examine elasticity at every point on this demand curve. Now the formula is lower segment by upper segment. No, so let us look at the first point, at point M, at this point. What do you observe? Lower segment is Mn. What about the upper segment? Divided by upper segment. There is no upper segment, therefore it will be 0. Any number divided by 0 is infinity. So now, let us suppose say, just from an example point of view, if the length of Mn is 100, it is like saying 100 divided by 0, whose value will be infinity. Clear? Let's look at the second point. So this is ED at point M. Now, ED at point A. Now, at point A, what do you observe? Lower segment is AN. So, let us suppose say the value, so AN, okay. What is the upper segment? MAM or MA, right? Now, we know that the lower segment is greater than the upper segment. So, if we had to take a value, in terms of a value, this would be like, this is 75, this length would be 25. Either way, they would cancel out, and what I would be remaining is with 3, right? Or, since this length is greater than this length, I will get a number whose value is greater than 1. Therefore, ED is greater than 1. At point A. Then let us look at point ED at point P. Now, at point P, we already know, being the midpoint, the lower segment is Pn, upper segment is Pm. Pn divided by Pm. And we know that these are both equal, so therefore they will cancel out and it will always be 1. So if I had to take it in terms of a number, numerical, This is 50, this is 50. So 50 and 50 cancels out. Again, it is equal to 1. So therefore, unitary elastic demand. Then we have at point, fourth point, that is point B. What is the value of ED at point B? Again, lower segment BN, upper segment BM. In terms of a value, what will it be? This portion here would be 25. This length over here would be 75. So it is like 25 divided by a smaller number divided by a larger number will always give me a value which is less than 1. Okay, so if I divide this, I get 0.33, right. So therefore, ED, in this case, ED is less than 1. Similarly, the fifth and the last point, ED at point N. What is the lower segment? We do not have there is no lower segment, so we take it as 0. What is the upper segment? NM. So we know that 0 divided by any number gives us 0. So same, 0 divided by 100 would always be a 0. So therefore, ED is equal to 0 at this point. So we have concluded, we have proved that we have proved the elasticity at different points on a demand curve. Greater than 1 made equal to 1, less than 1 equal to 0. So finally, this is what the geometric method is all about. At point M, ED value is infinite. At point A, ED is greater than 1. At point P, ED is equal to 1. Then at point B, ED is less than 1. And at point N, ED is equal to 0. So these are the 5 types of elasticities as shown on a straight line linear demand curve. And we have proved why it is infinite, why it is 0, why it is greater than 1, why is it 1 or why it is less than 1 at every point on a demand curve. So with this, we finish the geometric method and all the subtopics related to price elasticity of demand. Okay, these are 2 problems for you all to solve with elasticity of demand. They are simple. You can take them down and complete them at your own time. Thank you, students, and a happy learning to all of you.
Prudent Scholars, powered by Lupin Pharmaceuticals.
अब आपकी सुरक्षा आपके हाथों में। ल्यूपी सेफ हैंड सैनिटाइजर, आपका और चेन्नई सुपर किंग्स का फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस। अब आपकी सुरक्षा आपके हाथों में। ल्यूपी सेफ हैंड सैनिटाइजर, आपका और चेन्नई सुपर किंग्स का फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस। अब आपकी सुरक्षा आपके हाथों में। ल्यूपी सेफ हैंड सैनिटाइजर, आपका और चेन्नई सुपर किंग्स का फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस।